But our first introduction is, as I mentioned, we've got Maddie and Kyle from Amara and Associates. And I think those of you who came last time, actually, I don't know if the first time we did this that they had sponsored yet, but we're really gracious because they've underwritten this so that we can provide food and offer the space to do these great learning series. And I'm just thankful for them. And they've got actually a really interesting way that they help their clients that I think is so fitting to what we do. So I want Kyle or Maddie, whoever's going to come up, just to share a few words. They do have these. We've got some in the back that you can take once they're done. And then last time, and we had leftovers, there's some really great toys and dog bowls. Take those slices of pizza. My dog, they are amazing. You cannot destruct those, and they love it. So I'm going to turn it over here. Kyle, if you're going to come up.
Yeah, have it this way.
Oh,
Our dogs love it too. So, yeah. Thank you for having us as always. Basically, we help our clients. We're the only. I'll back up. We do personal injury, car accidents, that kind of stuff. But a lot of times, clients, well, they'll have their dogs or other pets in the car with them. We're the only injury law firm that actually helps get vet bills paid by the insurance companies. So technically it falls under the property damage claim. So like the fixing your car and like the laptop breaks. So we don't take a fee on that. We help our clients out with property damage for free. So we would be helping out getting animals to the vet and getting them checked out and depending on, how they're doing, whatever treatment they might need. And we don't take a fee on that. We're trying to help out. My wife and I are huge lovers, animal lovers. We've got 2 dogs, 6 cats at home. It's grown a little lately. But yeah, when we went out on her own from her previous employer, one of the first things she wanted to do was actually start giving back because her previous employer didn't do any charity. So we wanted to counteract that by doing a bunch.
That's really nice.
So yeah, hopefully you don't need us. We don't want people to need us. We're kind of a necessary evil around here. Well, not evil. But
Yeah.
We don't want people to be hurt, but when they are, we do our very best to help out.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Before I go.
Oh, of course.
And we're recording this, as we said, we want to share this information with others. So I want to thank you again for sponsoring and underwriting these learning series. And then we had as our first one to really kick off the learning series, which was a huge hit, was Becci Scott. And she'll share a little bit more about herself. But we needed to bring her back. And after that first one, we said, we're bringing you back and let's do it. And we had her set up a long time ago. And this is a great kind of next set of information that she can share, that you're going to learn a lot and understand how your pets in that environment affect your pets and what's the best way to help with that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Becci. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you. Just to share a little bit about myself, I started doing rescue work here in the Valley back in 1997. So almost 30 years of hands-on care with pets. It wasn't long before, well, back then, I should say, we didn't have the interwebs and we didn't have a lot of options to figure out how to help these dogs nutritionally. But I had a wonderful mentor who had a couple ideas and we started there. And then just through reading books and learning more from the pioneer vets back then that were understanding that pets needed fresher food and things like that, made a lot of headway. So for the majority of my rescue time, I've spent working specifically with those cats and dogs that come in the worst condition and need a whole lot of rehab. And in my experience, just getting them onto fresher food has made the biggest impact and difference in their life. So because my title is Certified Holistic Pet Health Care Coach, I like to explain that, yes, it was a holistic course that I was certified under, but I am very integrative with the care that I like to use for pets. People get confused with a lot of the terminology around holistic. there's homeopathic, there's acupuncture, there's chiropractic. All those things are kind of an umbrella under holistic care. So you might know of a veterinarian in the valley that says they're holistic and or integrative, and that might mean that they offer acupuncture along with their, pharmaceutical protocols and things. Integrative care is what I love because it's using kind of the best of both worlds. So some vets, when they finish vet school, will go beyond and study and become very proficient with homeopathy. They might just focus on acupuncture. They may really focus on chiropractic. They may choose Western or Eastern herbs or just traditional Chinese herbs. They all kind of do things differently. So I like to explain that because people will come into my store and say, well, I have a holistic vet, but then they're recommending kibble. So just because they're practicing holistic care doesn't mean that they're practicing everything, and you may still need to be tweaking that diet a little bit. I love when people are working with a holistic vet because they're usually very open-minded to understanding, and they appreciate the extra help because vets don't have time to be tackling the nutrition industry. We've got so much going on in nutrition these days. We want the vets to stay focused on their surgeries and their diagnostics and their life-saving care. So in my perfect world, we use pharmaceuticals when we need them for life-saving measures, but we use herbs and all the other things to support the body while it's healing and for those more long-term chronic problems, with always the goal of healing the pet and not needing to stay on things for long-term is really the ultimate goal. A little bit about myself. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease 27 years ago and took pharmaceutical synthetic medications. It wasn't long, and then I had 2 autoimmune diseases and just things piling up. As of last year, after doing a lot of the work that I've learned from my mentors and teachers about pet health, was able to reverse both of my autoimmune diseases. So no more Hashimoto's and no more lupus for me, but still a work in progress. There's still a lot of other things to tackle, but I oftentimes do a lot of the therapies that I'm working and learning with pets so that I know how it feels and where to go with it, and gives me a good foundation for what to pick and choose through for pets. So as far as talking about our environment today, I touched briefly on nutrition. I know a couple of you were here for the last talk where I went into a lot in depth in nutrition, but for the people that weren't here, in a nutshell, nutrition is the same for humans and pets, and it runs very parallel. So just facts, when you apply the least amount of processing to food once you grow it and pick it, it's the most nutritious state. As soon as you start chopping, applying heat, applying, freezing, then we lose nutrients. Some things are more gentle than others. Heat tends to be the most damaging. When we're talking about all the pet food categories, because a lot of people don't even realize how many categories we have now. It's not just kibble and raw food. There's a whole lot in between. So raw food's always going to be at the top. Dogs and cats have a very short digestive tract. They have a very acidic digestive tract, and they can process all the stuff that goes through. Our FDA holds our raw food manufacturers, the ones that are making commercial raw food, to a much, much higher standard than kibble food manufacturers, because kibble is cooked. So when our raw food manufacturers are about to release a lot of food, it has to be tested and they have to hold it until the results come back showing 0 pathogens. Where when you go to the grocery store and buy your raw chicken for dinner, there's an allowable amount of pathogens there because they're expecting you to go home and cook it, wash your hands, wash your dishes. So they're very careful with pet food because they know it's going to be served raw. If you do a quick Google search and look at the data, you will often see or quickly see how many billions of pounds of kibble are recalled for things like aflatoxins, which we'll talk about. There's been vitamin D toxicity from the synthetic pack that they have to put in after they cook all the nutrients out that has killed thousands of dogs. So we're working to understand better because we've all had this mindset that kibble is the safest and best way to go. Back in the 1980s, there was a marketing ploy that told us that, but now we know what a huge mistake it was because every species deserves to eat fresh food and a variety of fresh food. Whether or not you choose to go completely raw or you want some gently cooked or you need to stick with a kibble base and just get some fresh food in there, there's tons of ways to go about it that can really help your dog flourish. So I kind of talk about that here. Obviously, if you can do completely untouched, just, they chop the veggies and meats and put it together in a balanced way to where your dog is getting all the nutrition that is required by AFCO, the organization that decides what cats and dogs need. But they're doing it with real whole food instead of that. When you look at a food label and there's a whole paragraph of words you can't pronounce, that's a powdered synthetic vitamin pack. It's like giving your dog a Flintstone. And we know from science that only about 4% of that is recognized by the body and utilized. Most of it passes out through their urine. So though it sustains them for years and years, as they age, that coupled with some of the other things, then leads your dogs into deficiencies where they have chronic illness. I have 6 dogs and 5 of them are over the age of 9 and none of them are on any kind of synthetic painkillers or anything that people just naturally seem to expect for senior dogs. It doesn't have to be that way. So nutrition is key. If you can't go completely, doing fresh food in its raw state, you can use the new category of gently cooked. We've got more and more brands coming available where they're doing that same thing. They're meeting all the vitamin and mineral requirements with real whole food. But you have to watch and pay attention to the label because we have plenty that are putting some synthetics back in just because they're worried, feeling pressured. AFCO doesn't get along very well with our side of the industry because they're pretty governed by the large corporations. And those people want everyone to keep feeding kibble. And we're trying to kind of break through that and let people see that cats and dogs deserve to eat fresh food. If you're not able to switch completely to a fresh food diet, because it does cost more, you're feeding meat instead of fillers. There are lots you can do sticking with a kibble base, unless you're dealing with something like cancer, then you don't want to be feeding any kind of kibble diet, but you can add apiaceous vegetables in. That helps the body release aflatoxins, some of the toxins that we're going to talk about. You can enhance the amount of meat that they're getting by, when you're going to prepare meat for your dog, you want, or cat, boiling or poaching. Think always lots of moisture at a low temperature. It's the healthiest way to prepare meats. Even for ourselves, there's experts that have studied advanced glycation end products. When you cook food at high temperatures and keep it dry, these end products, then they go way up in numbers and your body has a very hard time flushing them out. Causes a lot of oxidative stress. So if you're gonna cook meat for your pet and yourself, poach or boil it. Doesn't taste as great as when we grill it and roast it and all that, but it really is the healthiest way, and dogs are just grateful to have the extra hunk of meat, so they don't care. If you're going to poach and boil, or even crock potting is a great way to cook for your pet. Get all that moisture in there. It's a nice low temperature and let it cook. You do want to try to get the excess fat out. Start it with as lean a meat as you can. Cooking fat is very hard on their bodies because it puts extra stress on the pancreas. pancreas has to work harder. And then we hear about a lot of cats and dogs having pancreatitis attacks after they've had the cooked skins and all that fatty parts of the meat. We know now, we used to think it was just cooked fat, but now cooked fats blended with carbohydrates, which is kibble has a lot of carbohydrates. Those two things together is like a recipe for super stress on the pancreas. So as little fat as possible if you're adding that fresh food into the bowl. As far as plants go, put them in your blender first, breaking them down so that the plant cell walls are kind of broken down will help them absorb more of the nutrients and benefit from that. But also digestion is easier for them. I am not saying don't give them as a treat as whole. If you want to give your dog a baby carrot instead of a milk bone, yay, do that. If you don't have time to always wear it down and you just want to hand them something, green bean, carrot, wonderful. Just if you're relying on it as some bit of nutrition in their bowl, make sure you're getting it word down in a blender or something.
Like freeze-dried chicken and freeze-dried berries, okay?
Absolutely, yeah. Freeze drying is, I guess I could finish. So when you're looking at the layers of food in the industry, raw food is always going to be the most nutritious. Down from that, you're looking at the gently cooked brands. From that down, freeze dried, but you want to rehydrate it when you're serving it. If you give a freeze dried treat, fine. But if you're serving a whole meal, don't make them eat it dry. That is then going to absorb, just like kibble, all the digestive fluids in their stomach. Their kidneys are working with sludge. They need a lot of moisture with their meals. But you do want to pay attention to how you're rehydrating it. Don't make it soup every time, because then you're literally watering down their meal and losing its natural acids, and you can change the pH of your dog's body over time. They'll develop, crystals, all that kind of stuff. So I usually tell people at least one time, get your portion of whatever dry food is, whether it's the freeze dried or it's a kibble, and measure the amount of dry food and the amount of water. Let it sit till it's absorbed. And then if there's extra water in, pour it back off and just subtract the difference. That way, you know, each time you're feeding, you don't have to wait for it to soak up. You just put those two amounts together and you're pretty good. Just don't give them whole meals dry all the time. That's very taxing on the system. They need that moisture. Their kidneys will love you and last much longer. After freeze dried and gently cooked, then it kind of starts to muddle together, but like canned food, because they're starting to apply heat to the food there. And you got the can liner to think about, those BPAs and those toxins in there. By the way, as I was writing this, I was thinking, I don't want to be a big negative Nelly. I'm not here to make it sound like you have to be afraid of everything in the environment. We do live in a pretty toxic world. So my goal is to point out some things to you, not to overwhelm you, but to pick through what you can change easily. And then, just be mindful of making other changes as you go. Don't try to make every single change in your household all at once, and don't want to create stress, just making you aware. So canned food, then the container itself has those linings that can be toxic, and they're applying heat, so it's leaching into the foods. Then down from there is kibble, where they've completely made it devoid of moisture, and they've cooked it usually about 4 times at up to about 400 degrees. We have a few brands that are very mindful in how they prepare their kibble. Some brands now, quite a while actually, have baked their food instead of made it by extrusion, which they're baking it at lower temperatures, shorter amount of time. It's maintaining more of its natural nutrition. And those manufacturers are typically using better sourced ingredients. So, excuse me, rather than feed grade ingredients, which is the meats that don't pass the USDA inspection for human edible is considered feed grade. And that's what gets used in pet feed. So the brands that are putting in the effort to do baking with good packaging to keep their foods fresher, they're typically proud of their sourcing and using more food grade ingredients. And then because they have been cooked, they do replace those nutrients that are lost with the synthetics. So with even the very best made kibbles, you're still feeding a fairly high amount of starch, the carbs, and some synthetics. There is one brand that I really like that has managed to make their kibble with no synthetics, and it's called Carnivore. They use real whole food. They use sprouted seeds to meet those vitamin and mineral requirements. Also provides a wonderful plethora of probiotics. It's a really great food, but if you're looking at kibble for budget, the Carnivore is pretty much the same price as fresh food. So it's used by a lot of our fresh food feeders. If they're going to travel, they'll take Carnivore with them as long as their dog can tolerate the carbs. Primal has made a whole new category now. It's freeze-dried kibble. So they're using their good, it's way higher in meat than most kibbles, but they did add some sorghum in it as the starch to keep them stuck together a little better. But by doing that, they brought the price point down from just regular freeze-dried food. So it's another option. No other brands have tried it or done it yet. And then the very least, actually, I would go to say toxic food that you can feed your pets are those semi-moist foods. Where when I was a kid, it was Gaines burgers where you could squeeze them and they were like Play-Doh. That stuff is chock full of additives that makes it that way, and nobody should be consuming that. So in looking at our environment and the things that we can do, cleaning up the diet is the biggest, most helpful step. The cleaner you can feed your pets and yourself, the healthier they will be, the longer their lifespan will be. So keep that in mind when you're picking your brands. Look at the labels, be a label reader. If there's a huge paragraph of difficult words to pronounce, that's a lot of synthetics that you're giving every single day. And that's where there was a brand a few years back ran into big trouble because their vitamin pack got out of balance and there was toxic levels of vitamin D. Thousands of dogs died and they were in a big lawsuit. So I like to feed my dogs real whole food because you can't OD on any of it. Nature makes sure that everything stays in balance. So unless you're feeding the same thing over and over and over, then you'll be devoid in certain things and have a buildup of other things. So when we feed fresh food, we feed a lot of variety and everything in moderation. We don't get stuck in a rut and make the same things over and over. And I mention it in here, if you're gonna do DIY, learn first. There are courses, there's great books, they're referenced in the back from Forever Dog with recipes. Once you learn the recipe, start kind of rotating through the different veggies. Don't use the same one over and over. But the book is written by Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Habib, and they cover all of that information. When people come into my store and say, oh, I crock pot meat and veggies and throw some rice in, I'm like, is your dog okay? We got to do some fixing or you're going to run into problems. And that's another thing with nutrition is that they're not going to show those symptoms after just a couple meals. It takes a long period of time, but you will run into chronic illness. What we serve our food in is important. So they've actually done studies on dog food bowls. Obviously, plastic's gonna be your most toxic. To my surprise, even like ceramic. I love ceramic because it's so pretty in the house, and I was always careful to make sure it was lead free, but it came up showing quite a bit of bacteria that gets stuck in those little fissure cracks when the glaze cracks. The safest things to use are gonna be your Pyrex glass or stainless steel, but you have to be careful with your stainless steel. If you run to the closest store and buy a stainless steel dog bowl, it's not tested and they come up positive for heavy metals, cadmium, lead, those are all in there. They kind of started putting things together when dogs' nose colors started changing and realized that it was because of these heavy metal buildups. So there's 3 brands and they are in the back here: Basis, WeatherTech, and Americat. If you have a little dog, the Americat is, they only make little bowls, but they test their metals to make sure that they are heavy metal free. So that's what all of my pets use, either glass plates for my cats, and then the dogs all use the Basis food bowls. When it comes to our households, this is where a lot of people don't realize all the things that we're doing, and the studies were so mind-blowing to me. The amount of microplastics showing up in cat and dogs is mind-blowing. And humans, they did a test. Every dog and human tested positive for microplastic in their testes. So these are endocrine disruptors. They mimic hormones. We're seeing tons of reproduction issues, not only for young women, but in breeding dogs. They're having lots of problems with reproduction. So this one's tricky to avoid because it's all over our planet. And the main source is bottled water. So for even those of us who don't use tap water because of the toxins and things in our tap water, we're usually relying, if not on little bottles, the big 5-gallon bottles to use, and there's microplastics in there. So it's hard to avoid, but do the best you can. If you have RO at home, let your cats and dogs drink RO water. Then if you do that, water's so complicated, you have to add some minerals back in because RO strips everything. So you need to spend a little bit of time and figure out how to replace some of the minerals that they're going to lose by drinking RO water. When it comes to, well, just to kind of touch, when they were doing all these studies on how many toxins were found in cats and dogs' urine and their blood, kind of came up that it makes sense. We mop our floors with whatever cleaner we think smells good and clean up. We wear shoes or socks. We wear clothes that we take off. We shower very frequently and rinse all these things off of us. But our dogs and cats are walking much closer to that floor. They're inhaling these things that we leave behind, and then they're licking their fur and their feet after they've laid on them and walked on them. So they're consuming these toxins at such a higher rate than we are, and it's catching up to them. So we can put a dog on the most organic, clean, fresh food and then feed them all these toxins from our homes. We've gotten to a point where we're so concerned with germs that now we're, covered in toxins. So dogs will still get cancer despite the clean diet if they're being constantly exposed to something else that's toxic. People don't realize that pet bedding usually sprayed with a flame retardant. They started doing some studies because says 1980, 1 in 200 cats had hyperthyroidism. By 2014, 1 in 10 cats now has hyperthyroidism. And they're very concerned, Oregon State University, about this potential link of flame retardants because cats lay around on cat scratching poles and they're covered in carpet that's been covered in flame retardants, or your pet bed has been covered in flame retardants. So organic pet beds are still a little hard to come by. There's been a few manufacturers, but because of the price point, they don't usually stay around very long. If you can't find an organic pet bed, you can do a big service by just using a pure cotton blanket or sheet and cover their favorite bed. It's not going to look as pretty in your living room, but you're able to pick that up and launder it regularly and protect them from a lot of those chemicals that are in the pet beds. And it's not just the pet bed cover, but the inner parts have stuff. The foam they use inside can be sprayed with things. So trying to find clean, organic ways for them to rest because their face is right on it. Yeah, I kind of touched on the household cleaners. I remember when my grandma cleaned the house, there was always a rinse thing. We mopped, but then we mopped again with clean water. We cleaned the sink and then we rinsed it with clean water. We've kind of gotten away from that, a lot of people, and I think it has to do with products started making it so your surface would be shiny or your surface would not get fingerprints. So we've stopped cleaning the toxins off once we've used them to actually clean. So looking for replacements for those kinds of things. Let a fingerprint be there. Just being mindful of the chemicals in there. And at the back couple of pages, I did make a list because I'm one of those junkies who spend my time looking like, oh, what's in Dawn Dish soap? Because people are constantly washing their dogs with it. If you pull up every one of those ingredients in Dawn Dish soap, you wouldn't put it on your cats and dogs anymore. There's a lot of disruptors in there. I won't even use it in my sink on my own hands anymore. It's everywhere, especially in cleaners. So fragrances, something where people want their house to smell fresh. They'll put the plugins in or buy the sprays. So toxic. I've literally helped a handful of cats who've had chronic watering eyes and sneezing where their owners thought they had a virus that couldn't show up in tests and they didn't know what to do. But they had a plug-in right by a cat tree, and that cat was just being exposed to all those synthetic fragrances. And that is all it took to cause almost asthma and just constant irritation. So just getting those out of the house, the cats were like, oh, I can breathe again. So I am a fan of essential oils, and I work with vets who use essential oils. There are actually 2 vets off the top of my head, 3, that their practices are almost exclusively essential oils. They are not what you read on the internet about being dangerous and toxic, and they're so much safer than synthetic fragrances. People don't think anything about putting a blade plug in, but then they're scared to use something that comes from nature, a plant. Yes, it's concentrated, and yes, you should talk to a vet who's familiar with them if you're going to go using them as some kind of therapy. I'm not promoting running out and grabbing your own oils and putting them all over. Don't do that. But they are not even close to as toxic or dangerous as these fragrances are that they're putting in your cosmetics, in your perfumes, in your candles, in your plugins. So consider a diffuser and put some lavender in there. It's amazing. Therapeutic grade oils are safe for cats and dogs, if you're especially lavender. There's certain oils that you don't even have to think twice about using. But if you're going to do that, then spend some time and learn, because there are some that can be an irritant to cats. They're not as sensitive as the internet wants to make you believe, but it's good to know what you're doing before you just randomly start putting oils in diffusers. Lavender is one of my favorite. A little story about lavender. I had rescued I went to county to check on a dog one day, and I left with 2 mother cats and a total of 14 kittens. I get home And these mama cats had ringworm, giardia, respiratory illnesses. Like, it turned into months and months and months of nursing all these animals back to health. And some of the cats, because of the herpes, they ended up with some scarring in their eyes. And although their viruses were managed and they weren't having flare-ups, they just had funky, damaged looking eyes. One eye would be perfect, the other eye was wonky. I was having a really hard time placing them in homes, understandably. I went to a seminar where there was, it was put on by Best Friends in Kanab, Utah. And afterwards, I grabbed the gal and I'm like, I've got this group of cats. I've placed almost all of them, but the last 5 or 6, I can't get into homes. They look this way. And she's like, bring them up. We'll take care of it for you, because they have adopters from all over the US who like special needs animals. So here's me with my car full of crates and litter boxes and 5 or 6 cats headed to Kanab. And I'm like, I've got to have something on hand. I brought a bottle of lavender. I like Young Living, but doTERRA is a great brand as well. I'm not here to promote brands. Had my little bottle of lavender, and every time I would start to hear them getting a little stressed or they'd kind of yowl, I'd just take the lid off and hold it right in front of my air vent so it would blow back there. Within minutes, they were all relaxed and calm, and we had a very stress-free trip to Kanab. So it speaks volumes to me when you can see things like that, the power of essential oils. My son and I make candles, and we have a line that's made from locally sourced beeswax, and we make them with pure essential oils, and we set them with hemp wicks. So it's the cleanest burning candle that you can have, and they're safe to burn in your home with your pets there. So look for things like that when you want to burn a candle. Buy a clean one. Don't run and get the little $5 one that's full of synthetics. You are going to pay more for a clean burning candle because all of the ingredients cost more to make it. Lawn chemicals, so herbicides and pesticides. I don't think we have to talk a lot there. I think it's pretty common knowledge that these things are damaging, but what I see on a pretty regular basis is that people don't realize when you're walking your dog, if you go in a green space that's public, or you go on a golf course, or even your neighbor's lawn, and you don't know what they've used, that means you need to wash your dog's feet when you get home. They're going to be covered in stuff that you don't know about, and they need to have those feet rinsed, especially if your dog has a microbiome imbalance and they're licking their feet all the time. Get those feet cleaned up as soon as you get home. What I have found to be the most effective, because I tell people and they actually do it, that's how I kind of gauge it, is have a little Tupperware dish with 50-50 apple cider vinegar and water, and keep the lid on it. Keep it by your door. When you get home, open it up like those, those kind of casserole type dishes. They can walk through it, have a towel there, let them walk right onto the towel, let it air dry. If they have fluffy feet and you need to pat it, fine, but let it air dry. That apple cider vinegar is so wonderful in a lot of ways. So you're getting the chemicals off their feet. It's super simple. They walk in the door and walk right through it. And then you're taking care of, some of those chemicals. While I was putting this talk together, I was pretty surprised. I don't think I made a note of it here, but the information they're finding that links between the herbicides and pesticides and bladder cancer. So we gotta really be careful that we're keeping that out of their little bodies. Vaccinating. I know that vaccinating is kind of a controversial subject. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I would never tell someone don't vaccinate your pet. That's irresponsible. They need vaccines. But Dr. Gene Dodds and Ron Schultz have done a lot of studies and found that once they've completed their puppy or kitten series, or if you get them as adults and they complete it then and get that 1-year booster, their vaccines are lifelong, just like us. We're not going in every year and getting shots, or every 3 years and getting shots. So the responsible thing to do, and I know that not all places accept it yet, but it's changing, is titer testing, where you get your pet tested to see if they have antibodies before you just go blindly re-inject them with more vaccines. People don't realize that that vial has preservatives in there, it contains mercury. You're putting heavy metals in your cat or dog every time you give them a vaccine. So I've seen over and over, almost 30 years ago, I remember at the shelter I was learning to groom at and work at, these animals would come in and get vaccinated, and 2 days later they were dying of parvo. Like, we had no idea what their vaccine routine was before they came in. Who knows if they got vaccinated a month before and now they're vaccinated again. And it's a lot for the body to handle under a really stressful time. And there are things you can do. There's a company called Adored Beast where they have a homeopathic remedy with thuya in it, which helps the body rid some of those extra things that come in the vaccine without negating the benefits of the vaccine. So learning about and kind of using those types of products so you can still get the shots that are required. If I think therapy dogs probably have to have certain vaccines, and then there's grooming or boarding. Some people just can't get around it. And then rabies is required by law for dogs, not for cats. So if you are at the point where you need that next rabies certificate, use your thuya, use it for a couple days before and like 10 days after, and it really helps the body recover from that hit. A lot of people think that, oh, if I wait 15 minutes and there's no reaction, it's fine. 15 minutes is not long enough. This stuff builds up in the body. They'll have chronic problems down the road, and you don't put it back to realizing that it was something you did 6 months before. So just be really mindful. They have, because they found these studies in human babies, they have created vaccines that are thimerosal free. So there are some vets in the valley where you can request that they order you thimerosal free vaccines. And thimerosal is the preservative that contains the mercury. So if you can get your vaccines without that, you're a step ahead of the game. But titer testing is amazing. There are some vets who want you back to do those regular shots, and they'll tell you titer testing is $800. It is not $800. Find a vet who will do it at a reasonable price for you. Sadly, my most recent integrative vet moved back to Thailand, so she's not here, but she always did it for me for like 85 bucks a dog. It's reasonable. You just have to find the vet that's willing to entertain that. Flea and tick meds. Oh boy. So it's been years now. I don't remember when they did this study, but the study on isoxazoline was pretty eye-opening in that 66.6% of the dogs in the test had neurologic events after receiving isoxazoline. So I did make for you on this page, I don't think my pages are numbered, but the drugs that are most commonly used that contain isoxazoline are all in that little gray box. You're taking more than a 50% chance at causing neurologic issues if you use those drugs. It's a pain to deal with fleas and ticks. I'm grateful to be here because I pretty much, after 23 years of grooming, just see them on the stray pets that I would rescue off the street. It's not very common here with our house pets, thankfully. But and I did list them. There are alternatives. You'll find them on here, I think, toward the end of what to look for. Yeah, there's a flea and tick section on safer options page that people have really good luck with using. Fleas really aren't that hard to kill. Well, it's a little laborious, I guess, because the flea cycle is about 7 days, 5 to 7 days. So I get rid of them with just shampoo. I don't put anything toxic on the cat or dog. And then wash all their bedding. They die from heat and they drown really easy. They're not that hard to get rid of. What happens is people do it all and they don't want to do it again, and usually a third time to get through all the life cycles of the fleas and flea eggs that are on the pet. Can be done. I don't think it's that hard, but a lot of people just want to use that spot on treatment and watch them die off and be done with it. So consider for your pet's wellness, putting a little more effort in and doing that if you ever find yourself in that situation. Ticks are a little more challenging because if they fall off and they'll climb up a wall and go behind a picture and lay a pile of looks like sand, but it's like 5,000 little tick eggs, then you've got a problem. There are some companies around the valley that are using a little less toxic sprays that you can do in the house if you run into a situation like that, but they're still not non-toxic. You still need to be mindful of keeping your pet's feet clean, keeping them bathed while those products are doing their thing in your environment. It's interesting to me that dogs and cats who eat fresh food are way less prone to external parasites. And if you add a little garlic, which is not toxic for cats and dogs, it's actually a deterrent because fleas and ticks don't like the taste of their blood when they have garlic in their system. So I did list on the flea and tick part about a company called Earth Animals. You're what?
We're really, we love garlic.
Oh,
They say we're
you're good.
They don't bite me, they bite other.
Yeah. Wow.
Mosquitoes.
Earth Animal is a brand that makes a powder that's got more than just garlic, some other natural plants that fleas and ticks don't like. I am not a big fan of using everything every day. So I would say if you go that route, use it during the flea or tick season. Get familiar with the systems. Dr. Karen Becker, who's referenced in the back here, she has a lot of her stuff got zapped online, but she had spent the time and created a map based on the region you're in, what seasons that you should be the most concerned and proactive with flea and tick prevention. And that's another thing, those spot-on treatments, they're not prevention. Your dog is literally walking around poisoned every single day so that if he gets bit, nothing's going to grow in his body. You're not going to get the eggs and things. So actual prevention means using something that's going to deter those fleas and ticks before they bite your dog. I personally love a product called Flea Flicker Tick Kicker, and I've used it on even my human kids that get mosquito bites. I use it on everybody. It's just a wonderful blend of essential oils. It smells incredible. And the trick is that you use it frequently. So if you're going camping, you spray your dog. If you can't smell it anymore, it's time to reapply. It's not as easy as just putting something on their shoulders once a month and moving on, but it is very effective and it's safe enough to use on yourself. I've used it on little 6-week-old puppies and kittens. I've used it for years and years and years and years. It's a great product. And I did list it in here for you. So I don't know how in depth you guys, I put this information so you can read over it if you want, but I put like endocrine disruptors. These are what they're called on the back of the bottle. If you want to go home and look at your cleaners and see if it has these things in there, and then kind of what to reference and look for. And I don't think we need to go through each one if you want to, but as far as try these replacements section on the safer options page, I could have made this so much longer. I tried to kind of keep it to what's easily available. I realized later that I did forget to list a couple of things, but if you go online and type like, what's a natural alternative to my Windex or whatever, there's so much information available to you. And then you can pick and choose what ingredients you want to use. And now there's all these great brands that are making super eco-friendly house cleaning products. Like it's not as hard as it used to be to find something and order it. And they're making things without plastic bottles now. So I get all my laundry detergents and stuff shipped right to me, and it comes in paper containers, everything's compostable. Like, it's really easy now to find substitutes for what we used to have to make ourselves. I did list the vets who you can find online. Dr. Jody Greenstern is local, so she might not have a huge online presence, but Dr. Janet Rourke and Melissa Shelton have tons of online information about essential oils. They pretty much, their whole veterinary practice is based on essential oils. That is something I meant to mention earlier when I was talking about the confusion about holistic care. Make sure that any vet you're working with has actually gone to vet school. So you want them to be a DVM and then have all these other credentials added on to that. Don't risk your pet's health by going to someone just because they studied essential oils. They can probably help and guide you, but don't let them make you think that they can make a diagnosis or treat you or those kinds of things. Make sure you're working with actual veterinarians who went to vet school and then went beyond that. And those are integrative. Let's see here. Yep, I saved this page from our broccoli, our last nutrition talk, because it just has good information that applies to what we're talking about today. Watch out for these no good toxic additives page. These are very, very commonly found in pet foods. So if you're going to buy something that's ultra processed, read that label. If one of these things shows up, just put it back on the shelf. It's so unsafe for them to have, especially if you give it to them over and over again. And then just some references, because if you go online to learn, there's so many rabbit holes and you can totally go down the wrong one. The people that I learn from and teach from have brought information that's fact-based. These things are all studies you can look up and read yourself if you want to. You like that. Everything that I share is stuff that's really been well researched and based on actual studies.